Good afternoon and welcome to the Chartered Banker Institute webcast series. I'm your host Graham Anderson from the Institute, and today I'm joined by Joe Owen, who's going to present on the mindset of success. Joe is the UK's #1 best-selling author on leadership, with titles including How to Lead, Tribal Business School, Global Teams and Mindset of Success. Joe holds an MA from Cambridge University, is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, was the best nappy salesman in Birmingham, and was responsible for putting the blue speckle into Daz. If you have any questions for Joe throughout today's webcast, please submit your questions and Joe will aim to answer as many questions as possible towards the end of today's webcast. I hope you enjoy today's webcast and I'll hand you over to Joe.
Graham, thank you very much for the introduction and welcome to everyone to this webcast, which is the mindset of success. And this is the result of 20 years of research into discovering what is the elixir of leadership. And for a lot of that time, my research has been focused on the skills of a leader. But the more I looked at the skills of a leader, the more there was a surprise in that you looked at some of the very best leaders and you quickly realize that the best leaders are not always the most skilled leaders. Indeed, as we progress during our career, we become ever more in the spotlight. And in the spotlight, our minor flaws suddenly shine up more and more. So it's very easy to see all the flaws in the most senior leaders. So how is it that some of the most successful and some of the most senior leaders succeed, even if they're not the most skilled? And clearly they have something else. And what is that something else? Well, the answer the clue to the answer is in the title of this webcast. The very best leaders act differently because they think differently. So the exam question I set myself more recently was to understand what is it that differentiates the very best leaders from the merely very good. So we'll start this webcast with a little quiz, and there's something you may want to think about as I unveil this to you. What do the following have in common? Korean baseball fans, camel racing jockeys, dairy hands, and Japanese waitresses. They all have one thing in common. They have all been replaced by robots. So, if all of those people have been replaced by robots, what's the future for all of us? Now, of course, and this challenge becomes actually even worse when we look forwards, or even more challenging as we look forwards. A recent study by Oxford University predicted that 47% of all jobs are at risk from automation. Now, arguably, that is a statistic that they could have found at any time since the start of the Industrial Revolution, in that industrialization, modernization has been putting traditional jobs at risk for 200 years or more. But there's something different about the findings now. Very much the professional jobs, the desk jobs, lawyers, accountants, and, dare I say it, possibly even bankers. So in the new world, what we need is, yes, we need a new set of skills, but we also need something that sets us apart from the next wave of automation and artificial intelligence and robots. Now, there is good news in all of this, because the work on mindsets had found three things which should be deeply reassuring to all of us. First is this, that the mindsets of the most successful leaders are absolutely consistent. They're consistent across geographies, across seniority, and across industry, whether it be public sector, private sector. Indeed, the research took me also into exotic areas of spies and sports and schools as well. So the first bit is mindsets are consistent. The second bit of good news is this. Anyone can learn these mindsets. So mindset is often a very grand word, and we think, well, what does it mean? Mindset is about habits of mind. We all have habits of mind. Some are productive habits, and some are unproductive habits. The work on mindsets of success has identified what are those successful habits of mind that we can cultivate. And when we think of them as habits, then of course we can learn to build those habits ourselves. And learning those habits is a bit like learning a sport or a musical instrument. We may never get to play the piano in Carnegie Hall, but with a little bit of practice, we can be a lot better than all of our peers. And finally, and there's the third bit of good news about the research on mindsets is this. You don't have to be a superhero to succeed. So all of my research wasn't focused on these superhero freaks of nature, because in fact you can't copy a freak of nature. The research I was doing was on ordinary people achieving quite extraordinary things. People like yourself or myself who just seem to go further and do more. So I was trying to understand what it was that differentiated them from everybody else. So without further ado, let me share with you the 7 mindsets of success. And here they are. Now, you'll see that it talks about 7 plus 1 mindsets of success. So the 7 mindsets you see listed on the slide in front of you are the 7 positive mindsets. And as I was doing this presentation in America, I'd focus just on these 7 mindsets. But here in Britain, we like to know about the 8th mindset, the mindset from the dark side. So at the end of this presentation, I will come on to the mindset from the dark side, and it is very important because it underpins the other mindsets as well. Now, when you look at these 7 mindsets, you may go, well, yes, that's all pretty obvious and pretty straightforward. And indeed, on a good day, we probably all have each of these mindsets to at least some extent. But there's a problem here, and the problem is largely one of word inflation. We live in a world where as soon as someone has got a hit that gets into a star has got a hit in the top 20, they're immediately billed as an international global megastar. And it's with all these words. So the challenge is to understand how the very best leaders think of these words versus maybe the way you or I would think about these words. And that's what we're going to do in the next 20-30 minutes. We're going to unpick each of these words and show what they really mean. So let's start with high aspirations. And why are high aspirations so important? They're probably the starting point for all the mindsets. Because actually, if you have genuinely high aspirations, what you find is that courage flows very, very quickly from that, resilience flows from it, and a positive mindset flows from it as well. So high aspirations drives a lot of the other mindsets that you see there. So what do high aspirations actually mean? Well, here is a pretty good version of what high aspirations might mean. Excellence, of course. We want to be excellent. Dealing with the here and now, because we have to deal with the here and now. Deal with the art of the possible, and of course, develop and grow yourself. So that's how a good leader might think about high aspirations. But the very best leaders think differently about high aspirations. They don't think about excellence. They think, how can we do things just differently and better? And indeed, for the best leaders, excellence is a real trap. Excellence is about improving on what we've got, making small, incremental gains, and actually not taking big risks, not challenging the status quo, not daring to step out. And this is important, because if we think about what is a leader, and perhaps the best definition I have ever heard comes from Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger defined leadership as the art of taking people where they would not have got by themselves. Okay? I'll just repeat that. Leadership is the art of taking people where they would not have got by themselves. Now, you may think about that and go, well, that's a pretty dull and boring definition. But it isn't. It is, in fact, a radical definition of leadership. Because it means there are many people in very senior leadership positions with titles such as Prime Minister or President or Chief Executive who aren't leading. They are simply following a legacy that they have inherited. Meanwhile, there are lots of people further down in the organisation who really are stepping up and taking people where they would not have got by themselves. So leadership is not about your title, but it's about what you do. Just as a couple of examples of that, John Major was famously attacked for being in office but not in power. That is a good example of someone who wasn't seen to be taking people where they would not have got by themselves. And recently I met someone called William Rodriguez. He was probably the last person, or possibly one of the last people out of the World Trade Center on 9/11. The reason he was the last person out of the World Trade Center was that although he got out early, he decided to go back in and lead some people to safety. So on that day, he really was taking people where they would not have got by themselves and made an incredible difference. And what was William Rodriguez's title? Was it sort of Senior Executive Global Vice President of Megacorp? No. He was a janitor. So janitor by title, but leader by action. So, if we are going to take people where they have not got by themselves, then excellence is not enough. We have to have the courage to do things fundamentally differently, to challenge the status quo. So that means the best leaders don't start with the here and now, because if we go to the future simply from here, then our walk to the future is a random walk. The best leaders don't start now, they start at the end. They start with thinking, what do I really want to achieve? And then they work back from there. Third, the best leaders aren't really interested in the art of the possible. Like all good entrepreneurs, they actually don't have a complete grasp of the English language because there's one word they don't understand. They don't understand the word impossible. Instead, they will reach for the stars. They may settle for the moon, but they reach for the stars. So again, this comes from personal experience. In my past, I founded Teach First, which is now the largest graduate recruiter in the UK. And that was the classic entrepreneur's tale, in that we had countless experts telling us how it would not be possible because the unions would hate it, nobody would sign up, there wasn't any money, the government wouldn't approve it, the schools wouldn't want them, and so on and so forth. And if we had listened to the experts, we would have realized that starting Teach First was impossible. But like all good entrepreneurs and all good leaders, you don't listen to the naysayers. You focus very much on what is it we're going to achieve, and you make it happen. And finally, and this is important, of course, all good leaders want to develop themselves. That's the growth mindset. We should all look to improve. But the very best leaders go a step further. They're absolutely focused on this long-term mission on reaching for the stars. And they will do whatever it takes to get there. And the whatever it takes then leads straight on to a couple of other mindsets, the courage mindset and the resilience mindset. So let's look at those two. The courage mindset. Why is this important? The courage mindset is vital because if as a leader you are going to take people where they have not got by themselves, by definition, you are going to be not following the herd, you're going to be leading the herd. And that puts you in an exposed and dangerous position. When you succeed, of course, the herd will follow and they will claim your success. But when you fail, you will find that failure is a very lonely place indeed. So it takes courage to lead. And this has been a surprise finding. In fact, courage was only put in as a possible mindset as a result of my work with tribes around the world. And in looking at tribal leadership, clearly courage was one of the three most important things that everyone looks for in their leader. And that would often be physical courage. But leaders today, well, leaders of today don't have to lead their troops into battle. So why is it that leaders of today need all this courage? And over 80% of these outstanding leaders that took part in the research identified courage as one of the core mindsets that they needed on their journey to success. And in the slide in front of you, you will see some of the reasons why these leaders think that courage is so important. We've already talked about trying new things, taking not just yourself out of the comfort zone, but your team and your organization out of the comfort zone. Second, and I think we all see this in our professional lives, there are moments of crisis and ambiguity and uncertainty when no one is quite sure what to do. And these are the moments where leaders step up and followers step back. It takes courage to step up, to focus on action as opposed to focusing on analysis. But this is the moment where leaders make their mark. Leaders also need to have courage to have those difficult conversations and difficult decisions about performance and about expectations. But that's vital because all of our followers have to be able to trust us. And that means we have to be honest with our followers about how they're performing, about expectations around projects and about promotions and about pay. Because if we're not honest at the start, which may require a difficult conversation early on, we can find ourselves having an even more difficult conversation at the end when expectations have to be dashed in a way that hasn't been expected. And when expectations are dashed, then suddenly trust and belief in the leader disappears very, very fast. So have those difficult conversations, make those difficult decisions early. And finally, be prepared to challenge convention. Again, that takes courage because challenging convention is, by definition, risky. Sometimes you'll succeed and sometimes you won't. So high aspirations drives courage. Courage drives the next mindset, which is resilience. By definition, if you are taking risks, not every risk will succeed. And when things go wrong, that is when you need to draw on your reservoirs of resilience. And indeed, the difference between failure and success for many of these leaders is often as simple as giving up. Remember, Churchill was very much a maverick for most of his career. He himself described his period between the two world wars as his wilderness years. He was simply an outcast, but he never lost belief, and he kept going until he had his finest hour. So here's another little quiz question for you that you might want to think about. Okay. Who is this person? Age 7, he was forced out of his family home and had to start working. Age 9, he lost his mother. Age 22, he started his first business and it failed. Age 23, having got a job, he lost his job. It was also a bad year because he failed to get into law school and he lost an election. Age 24, he started another business and that failed. Age 25, he lost another election and proceeded to lose another 7 elections over the next 25 years. Age 26, you'll not be surprised what happens now. He had a nervous breakdown and spent 6 months in bed. So this is someone who does not have success coming naturally to him. And his name, Abraham Lincoln. So resilience is often the difference between failure and success. A more immediate example, one of the leaders I interviewed started his career as a door-to-door salesman selling kitchen utensils. Now, if you do that, you will succeed with about one door in 100. So you get 99 doors out of 100 slammed in your face. I asked him, how do you cope with so many doors getting slammed in your face? He said it was wonderful, because every time someone slammed a door in my face, I knew that I was one door nearer success. Now that really is resilience. So, how do you build resilience? Well, the good news is there is a huge amount of research on this. A lot of the research comes from some of the very darkest places which require some of the very highest forms of resilience, specifically concentration camps in the Second World War and prisoner of war camps in the Vietnam War. And there are some consistent themes across all the research that was done by people both in those camps and people researching survivors of those camps. So I note high aspirations is one of those forms of resilience. If you really believe in your mission, you will drive through failures, drive through setbacks in order to achieve your goal. The way this worked out in the prisoner of war camps was around what Viktor Frankl, one of the survivors and founder of logotherapy, called the will to meaning. You have to have some sense of purpose that gives you meaning, gives you a purpose in life. Second, being positive is absolutely essential. We heard that about the person that started his career selling door-to-door, the positive mindset. And we're going to explore that more later. But one example from the Vietnam prisoner of war camps, it's called the Stockdale paradox, after James Stockdale, who was one of the senior prisoners in a Vietnam prisoner of war camp. And so he was marked out for special treatment. His greeting on arrival in the prisoner of war camp was, "Here you will find it easy to die and hard to live, and I am going to show you just how hard." In the camp, they had no control. They had no control over when they were able to eat or sleep or when they were going to be beaten and tortured. So how do you survive that? Well, this is the paradox. If you're too positive, you don't survive. So there were prisoners who thought, well, I'll be out by Easter, I'll be out by Independence Day, I'll be out by Thanksgiving, I'll be out by Christmas. And each time their hopes would get dashed and their morale would go down and down and down, and eventually they would give up. So too positive, just hopelessly optimistic, you don't survive. The pessimists also didn't survive. The people who did survive were the people who took control and said, right, I now know that the battle is for control of my mind. And what I will do is I will win that battle. They gave themselves a purpose. They gave themselves something that they could control and they could at least try to win. And that was the part of their positive mindset. But also, they worked very hard to support each other. So that's the collaborative mindset. So one of the things they did was although they were held in isolation, they worked out by tapping on pipes, they could communicate with each other in a sort of code that they developed. And apparently they spent their time telling each other's very bad jokes. But hey, that keeps you going. And incidentally, one of the key values of the Royal Marines, where I was recently, is humour in adversity. So again, if you want to hear bad jokes, go to the Royal Marines. So they don't say cope with adversity, but humour in adversity. Support each other that way. And finally, the growth mindset. We'll cover this more later. But the growth mindset is one where you don't actually recognise failures. Each setback is simply an opportunity to learn more, grow more, understand more. And if you regard every setback as a learning opportunity, you simply get stronger and better. And that's realistic, because if we think about where have we learnt the most, it's often been from some of the toughest experiences we've been through. So let's look at those mindsets in a little bit more detail. Let's look at the positive mindset. Now, the positive mindset, this is a really dangerous mindset. This sounds, in fact, I saw how dangerous it was when I was checking into a hotel recently. And the receptionist had clearly had a very bad day. And she kind of threw the keys across the counter at me after a somewhat surly encounter. And then she suddenly remembered her positive training kicked in. And as I was taking the keys to go to the lift, she said, "Oh, have a nice day." When clearly what she really meant was, "Please drop dead." So, look, you can't mandate people to be positive. And having positive as a corporate value is pointless. Being positive doesn't come from the outside, it comes from the inside. And being positive isn't just about your career, it's about your life. Let me give you an example. This example comes from nuns. Now, nuns are wonderful for research because most of the variables are controlled out. They all live roughly the same lifestyle, they have the same beliefs, they have the same routines, they have the same diet. So if you're doing research, nuns are great. Now, in my past, I was on the board of the Wellbeing Institute at Cambridge University, and they did research on nuns. And they looked back at the admission statements that nuns had made when they first came to join the order, because all the nuns have to write a statement saying that why they want to join. So some nuns wrote what you would predict. They wrote things such as, well, this is my calling, this is my duty, I have always been brought up to believe that I should serve. And that's wonderful. That's all about service and duty. So let's call that group of nuns the duty nuns. But there was another group of nuns who wrote things in their admission paper, such as, I'm so happy I've got this opportunity, I'm so lucky, this is what I've always wanted to do with my life, this is the best thing that could possibly happen to me, this has been my dream. So let's call that group of nuns the fun nuns. So we've got the duty nuns on one side, the fun nuns on the other side. Now, let's roll the video forwards 60 years and see what's happening to those two groups of nuns. Well, the duty nuns, most of them are either dead or in ill health. That's not a surprise given the amount of time that has passed. What's happened to the fun nuns? They're all alive and kicking and still saying, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me and I'm so happy. So, what do we find? Well, being positive is one of the keys to longevity. But it's not just that. It's also a key to, incidentally, that sort of research has been replicated elsewhere. But it's not just key to longevity, it's also key to performance. So, how do you learn to be positive? And this has been a real challenge for me, because I was brought up to believe that the only reason it's not raining is because it's about to rain. And then I'm told, oh, and incidentally, if you're not positive, you're going to die. So that really messes you up. So I've had to learn how to be positive. So here's how you can be positive. And by the end of this, you're not only going to be positive, you're going to discover how you can be the luckiest person in your office. So, first, focus on what you can do, not on what you can't do. It's very simple. Second, see the upside before you start examining the downside of any idea. In the corporate world is risk-averse. We always see the risks, we always see the dangers very clearly, and if you want to show you're smart, you point those risks and dangers out. But the problem with that is, if we list all the risks and dangers of an idea first, the idea is dead on arrival. But turn it around, explore all the benefits first, and suddenly if the idea is really, really good, then it's worth dealing with all the problems and risks that everyone will identify. Oh, and incidentally, you'll be seen to be positive. The third point here, discover what you enjoy. This is just like your granny speaking, isn't it? But it's more than that. It's really important because you only excel at what you enjoy. Being really good at something takes effort. It takes a lot of extra effort, discretionary effort. And of course, as professionals, we're used to putting in extra effort. We can put in discretionary effort for a week, a month, maybe even a year or two. But at some point, if we're not enjoying it, we simply burn up and give up. So, enjoying it isn't a nice to have, it's a must have. And as a leader, one of the things we have to do is find the context in which we will flourish and which we enjoy. If we're not in the right context, that's our responsibility. We have to find it. Third, look to the future, not the past. Fourth, count your blessings. Simple exercise. Think of all the rubbish things that have happened today and then see how you feel. Actually, no, don't do that exercise. It'll make you feel bad. Do the alternative. Think about all the good things that have happened today, and it's great. Okay. Little example, after a hard research trip in the bush, I had got to a hotel with a tin shack roof, barbed wire fence, fell asleep in a filthy bed, got up the next morning, went to a filthy bathroom, and I had two miracles happen in 2 minutes. First, I turned on one tap, cold running water came out. I didn't have to go to walk 2 kilometers to a crocodile-infested river to get some water. And a moment later, I turned the other tap on, and warm water came out, and I didn't have to go and gather firewood and heat the water up myself. So now, every morning, I wake up to 2 miracles in 2 minutes, and it's hard not to have a good day after that. So when we think about counting our blessings, count all those things that we take for granted. Be lucky. That's easy. Patience, practice, persistence. Be lucky. Keep going. Keep trying. Some wonderful research on a lady who was very lucky, kept on winning money, kept on winning cars and holidays. What was the secret of her success? She entered over 200 competitions every week. So you're going to get lucky if you do that. Practice. Arnold Palmer, the great golfer, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. It's true. And perspective. Count your blessings. Okay. So that's how to become the luckiest person alive. Patience, practice, and perspective. Act, don't analyze, find support. Those things speak for themselves. Right. The next mindset. Responsibility. Blimey, that sounds really boring. Responsibility and accountability. But it is vital. Absolutely vital. Perhaps the best book that you never need to read was written by Jack Welch, the legendary leader of GE. The title of the book is this: Control Your Destiny, or Someone Else Will. And the reason it's the best book you never need to read is because the message is in the title. Control your destiny, or someone else will. And that really is pretty much a good definition of responsibility. Now, you may say, well, of course leaders are responsible for things. Didn't Truman put the buck stops here? Well, let's look at it again. So, of course, good leaders are responsible for successes. And that's how they justify all their bonus schemes. But actually, the very best leaders do something different with success. Instead of hogging the success, they share the success. And by sharing it, of course, they engender huge loyalty from the team and everyone else that they've shared success with. Oh, and incidentally, they simply get more of the limelight shown onto themselves as a result. So they land up taking by giving. Failures. Well, again, it's natural to point the finger, but the very best leaders don't point the finger. They accept that the failure was their responsibility. And as soon as they do that, the team can move away from politicking and pointing fingers to saying, right, what do we do about it? How do we drive to action? How do we move on? It is transformational. But it's the last one that is the real killer for a lot of leaders. It's this: we're responsible for our own feelings. Okay? One of the leaders put it very well. He said, I used to get very angry, but I realized that actually as a leader you have to wear the mask of leadership. Because if I come in depressed or angry, my depression and anger will very quickly spread like a major depression across the whole office. So I have to learn to control my feelings. And again, the research from the Wellbeing Institute at Cambridge University is very clear that actually we can all choose how we feel. So if at the end of a long day, someone who knows how to wind you up comes along and decides to press all your buttons to make you very angry, annoyed, and upset, of course, you have every right to be angry, annoyed, and upset. But actually, that is your choice. So, just knowing that you have a choice over how you feel is actually liberating. Just make the right choice. And remember this, that as a leader, none of us are going to be remembered for beating budget by 5.3% in 2017 or whatever our achievement is going to be this year. Indeed, think back on all the leaders that you've worked with. Can you remember when they beat budget by 5.3%? Probably not. But can you remember what they were like? Of course you can. You can probably remember them in vivid detail. And so that is how each of us is going to be remembered. We're going to be remembered for what we are like. And that means we are going to be remembered for how we express our feelings. So choose well. Next, all leaders are collaborative. Of course they are. But that means that they all make a vital transition. And it's this. It's the transition from a worker to a manager. As workers, people immediately think, well, how do I do this when presented with a task? Leaders don't think that way. They don't think, how do I do this? They immediately think, who can do this? So how to who is a fundamental mindset change. And with that goes a relentless devotion to delegation. But you can only delegate if you trust your team. And if you don't delegate, that is a massive vote of no confidence in your team. And if you don't trust your team and you don't have confidence in your team, either you have the wrong team or the team has the wrong leader. But this collaborative mindset is becoming more and more important in the 21st century. Because in the past, leadership could get away with command and control. But as organizations hollow out and delayer, we increasingly find that leadership is no longer about making things happen through people we control. It's about making things happen through people we don't control. And that changes everything. That means we have to learn the arts of influence, which I lay out in my other books, but influence such as how do we influence people to follow us? How do we influence people and decisions over which we have no control? When do we know to fight battles? And how do we fight those battles? Okay. And as a collaborative mindset is also about being the role model, not just the boss. Okay. It's short on time, so I'm going to move forwards and make sure there is time for questions. But before I move forwards, I'm going to ask you a question. And the question is this: how have you learnt to lead? And hopefully you're going to see a little voting panel come up. So how have you learnt to lead? And you've got 6 options here. You can choose books and courses, or bosses. Good, and that can be good or bad lessons. Peers, inside, outside work, and again, that could be good or bad lessons. Role models, or from experience. Okay. So, I am hoping that you have all got something that you can vote on there. I can't see it. I'm going to ask Graham if that is available.
That's available now to our audience. So just a
brilliant.
The question.
Okay. Thank you very much.
How have you learned to lead?
Vote away Oh, I can see a few votes coming in. I'm just going to leave it for a moment while you do that. And while you're doing that, you can think about questions you may want to be asking me as well, because I am going to leave time at the end for questions if I can. If I don't, I will be given a hard time back around.
Yeah, just a reminder as well to our audience, if you do have any questions for Joe at the end of today's presentation, please feel free to submit your questions. And Joe will be kind enough to answer as many questions as possible.
Right. So, we're getting some votes coming in. I'm going to take my... In fact, I'll tell you what, if there's a question I can deal with now while the votes are coming in. Right? All right.
I'll just check. Yeah, we have a couple of questions that came in. We can take one now before we go back to the results of those votes.
Okay.
Okay. Is there one mindset above all others?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's a bit like asking which is your favourite child. It's a very dangerous question to answer. And this was one where I was thinking, where do I start the Mindsets book? So I start the book with high aspirations, because if you really have a mission that you're completely committed to and is really important to you, you will make more or less any sacrifice for that. And we've seen that with soldiers and saints down the years, and indeed nowadays with all these great explorers and adventurers who want to climb up mountains and cross oceans and all these things. They go to extraordinary lengths and through extraordinary hardship because of this extraordinary mission that they give themselves. So high aspirations absolutely drives both the courage and resilience and positive mindsets quite naturally. So if there is said that, actually one of the key insights is this: you don't need all 7 mindsets. All you need to do is work on 1 or 2 mindsets and become a little bit better at those, and then you will find that you are beginning to stand out from your peers very, very quickly. So it's not all or nothing. Just pick 1 or 2, and that'll be great. Right, shall we go to the votes?
Yeah, I think we'll just close that vote off. So last chance to vote, I think. We've got 1 more minute.
I'm going to see how we can get the answers up. So it's very exciting for me. Let's see what happens.
So we've just closed that vote question, and the response is quite good. So the question was, how have you learned to lead? 21% said books and courses, 5% said bosses, another 5% also said peers, 37% said role models, and 32% said experience.
Right. So the overwhelming majority down at experience and role models. It's only slightly devastating. Look, for an author who gives courses, I was hoping that, of course, you'd all go books and courses, but I will live with the insult. But that is a completely predictable outcome. So how do we learn? We learn either from first-hand experience or from second-hand experience. That makes sense. So we see something that works, we try and do more of it. We see someone mess up, we try and avoid stepping on that landmine ourselves. But there is a problem with that, that if we simply rely on experience, then our journey to leadership is a random walk. So how do we make sure that it isn't a random walk? Well, that's where books and courses come in. You can't start the day, a leadership course in the morning and finish it in the evening and be a great leader, and you can't start a book on leadership and finish on page 271 and be a great leader. But what books and courses do is they can help you put some structure on your random walk of experience, and they can help you make sense of the nonsense that you encounter day to day. So learning to grow and learning to lead is absolutely vital. What we know is the nature of leadership changes dramatically at every stage of your leadership journey. We know that the skills you need are going to change dramatically. And so the only way we can succeed is by keeping on growing, keeping on learning. And I'm going to give you a very simple way of accelerating your learning. It's the WWW and EBI. So after every significant event, it might be an important phone call or a meeting or whatever, or a presentation, just ask yourself those two questions. WWW, what went well? A lot of people are rubbish about learning from success, but success is precious and it's difficult. So each time you succeed, capture yourself as succeeding and ask, why did I succeed? What did I do well? And then keep on doing it. And ask that even when things have gone awry. Because even when things have gone awry, you probably did something to stop it becoming even worse. Learn from that. And then regardless of the outcome, ask yourself the other question, EBI, even better if. What could I have done even better? So just keep on asking yourself those two questions and you will quietly accumulate your own success formula that's going to work for you in your environment. And that's all that matters. So I said that there's going to be an eighth mindset, the mindset from the dark side. To set it up, actually, I'm going to ask you a question. Here it is. It's about penicillin, discovered by Alexander Fleming, 1928, but very difficult to manufacture in any volume. One of the first large volumes of penicillin was made available in 1943, came from America, and was shipped out to the front in Egypt. And the generals there weren't sure how to use it. They understood what penicillin was about, but they had a choice. They could either use quite a lot of it on a few wounded soldiers who could then recover from their wounds. But of course with that, the danger is that some of those soldiers would have recovered anyway, and some might die anyway. Or they could use a little bit less penicillin per soldier for all the soldiers who'd been fooling around in the pleasure palaces of Cairo and Alexandria and had got the clap. And having got a dose of the penicillin, they'd be then fit to go back to the front. So, your choice. What would you do? Would you give the penicillin to the wounded war heroes, or would you give it to the soldiers who'd been fooling around? And in truth, the generals didn't know what to do. So they cabled back to London and asked Churchill what they should do. And the answer was, use it for best military advantage. In other words, get as many troops back onto the front line as soon as possible. So all the soldiers who'd been fooling around got the penicillin, and the wounded war heroes were left to take their chances. That sounds a pretty unpleasant and ruthless decision. But if your focus is very clear, it's about winning the war, then you make those ruthless decisions. So that gives the clue to the final mindset, which is ruthlessness. All the best leaders are deeply ruthless. Now, they all hate being called ruthless, because being called ruthless, in the words of one of them, said, well, she said, that sounds like you're a complete bastard, and that's not what I am like, she said. So I then asked her about her own career, and she said, well, she'd started at the school, she was a head teacher, with a good university friend. And they'd both gone through the school, risen through the ranks. They lived close to each other. They went and had lunch with each other on Sundays. Their families grew up together, and they had holidays together. And this head teacher, she was appointed head. She looked around the school, and she thought, well, how have I got to improve this school? And she realized that there was one area which was holding the school back massively, and it was the English department. The English department was run by her long-time friend. What did she do? She got rid of her friend. She fired her friend because the school was more important than anything else. The mission with that, suddenly a long friendship evaporated overnight. Of course, she didn't think herself as ruthless. She simply said, well, you've got to have a hard edge if you're going to deliver the mission and if you're going to serve the children properly. So once again, we come back to high aspirations, this sense of mission being absolutely vital. If you really believe in achieving the mission, then you will do what it takes to get there. And it isn't always very pleasant. But the mission comes first. Again, the Royal Marines were very clear about this. The mission comes first. So what are the priorities? First, the opposition, deal with them. Second, the team. And third, yourself. Boom. Ruthless. So that's the dark side. So first, let me just now thank you all for being very patient and listening. We come towards an end. I'm going to now turn it over for questions. But before I do so, I just want to say thank you for listening. We're all about to go on our different journeys now. And whatever your journey is, enjoy it. Thank you very much. Graham, questions?
Yeah. Thanks, Joe, for today's presentation. Just quickly like to say apologies if anyone found any of the language offensive. I think we've got time for a couple of quick questions. I think we can squeeze at least one in. Can anyone really have all 7+1 mindsets?
I think it's fair to say that nobody is going to have the 7+1 mindsets completely, and you don't need it. But equally, all of us have all of those 7 mindsets to some degree. So this isn't a digital world where you've either got it or you haven't got it. It's an analog world where you have some of all of them. So the key is to be able to dial up just a few of them. And you will find that you can, if you think of them not as mindsets, but as habits of mind, you can actually learn these new habits, just as I've had to learn the positive mindset. There are very simple tricks that you can do to just train your mind to think differently, so in my case, think positively, and that helps hugely.
I think we've got time for one more question, Joe, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Why do unpleasant leaders succeed?
Leadership is not a popularity contest. It was Machiavelli who posed the question this way. He said, is it better for a prince to be loved or feared? And his conclusion was actually it's better for a prince to be feared, because he said a few ritual executions will keep everyone in order and will ensure that people don't step out of line. You don't have disorder and crisis. Whereas a leader who's an easy touch, disorder arises very quickly. But actually, that is a false choice in today's world, because the currency of leadership isn't about fear or love. The true currency of leadership today is about trust and respect. If you can be the trusted and respected leader, then people will follow you. But inevitably, that means that there are some people. So even leaders who are unpleasant still have a team that trusts them and they trust the team. Okay. Unpleasant leaders can succeed. There's the psychopaths. And there's plenty of evidence that psychopaths are disproportionately represented both in leadership and in the prison population. They are very good at manipulating people, and the danger of the non-psychopaths is that we don't have as much practice as they do in manipulating, lying, and deceiving. So it is very difficult for us to deal with them.
Thanks, Joe, for today's webcast. Can you hear me? Thank you for answering that question. For members of the Chartered Banker Institute, today's webcast can be recorded as part of your ongoing CPD. Remember to log your CPD via the logbook via the members area of our website. The slide pack will be available to all listeners after today's presentation, along with links to Joe's recent publications and articles. We welcome your feedback on today's webcast, and finally, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for your participation, and thanks for listening. Thank you.